Hello, everybody. I'm Zias Caraval, Principal Analyst with ZK Research, and I'm hosting this episode of AI Skeptics. In our previous conversations of the AI Skeptics series, we've heard about perspectives around how AI or artificial intelligence will help IT practitioners and technology channel partners accomplish more. In today's conversation, I'll be joined by Sharon Mandel, CIO of Juniper Networks. Sharon, why don't you say hi?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
And we're also joined by Juniper Networks Ambassador, Christian Scholes of Axiom Networks and Solutions. And so why don't you say hi as well, Christian?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
And it's a great duo to have because they can both share some takeaways on what it's like to actually implement AI and work alongside it. And, Sharon, I'll start with you. You and I have been talking about AI for quite some time, and it's kind of a funny topic because I think everybody kind of conceptually understands the value, although there's a lot of skepticism and trepidation around it. So just talk a little bit about the process you went through rolling out Mist inside Juniper.
Well, sure. Well, rolling out Mist is fairly straightforward because a lot of it comes out of the box. So I think for a lot of people, they hear AI, they think, oh my God, I have to hire, an army of data scientists. I have to do all of this work. And in this case, the AI is built in. And so it starts with models that are trained, and then it gets to understand your network. And so it's not a lot different than installing any other Wi-Fi network, except that it's easier because we build in the pre-configuration and make that simpler. I think the other challenge is, people start to wonder, oh my God, is my job going to go away as a network administrator? And I think that very quickly people understand that that's not true, right? Because the situation was they always had more work to do than there were people to do it. They were solving problems that, were like finding a needle in a haystack because the scale of the data that had to be analyzed to solve them was so large. And so really what introducing AI into that mix did was it took away the mundane problems. It made some of the very complex ones much easier to solve. And then they got to go back to the work that they really like doing, which is architecting and designing networks, not troubleshooting them.
Yeah, the analogy you used about it sort of being embedded is interesting because it's not unlike an automobile today, right? There's AI in your car that helps with lane change alert, parallel park assist, adaptive cruise control. And it's not like we need to be data scientists to drive today. We just need to go in and it makes us smarter, better drivers. Similarly, it sounds like your implementation of AI made your engineers smarter, better engineers. So Christian, now you've been using Mist a couple of years now. So why don't you talk about your journey?
Yeah, I started with, I was around 2020 when I started with Mist. I started with adopting it in my home. So I built this new house for me and my wife. And obviously, it always was my dream to build a smart home, a true smart home. So I started with roughly 200 sensors. I'm currently at roughly 300 to 350 sensors. And as you can imagine, with that amount of sensors, you don't want to administer all of them by hand. So you basically want to architect what you want to achieve. Like I want a certain temperature, or I want a certain air quality, or whatever you feel comfortable with. And then you want the sensors to interact with each other and the orchestrator or the AI part to basically control all of that to fulfill exactly what you asked it to do.
That's interesting. So I can't wait to see that. So next analyst summit we should do at your house. So we can take a look at that. Another question for both of you, and Sharon, I'll start with you again. How long did it take to start seeing value from AI?
Well, each use case is a little bit different, right? So, you asked me specifically about Mist. That happened very, very quickly because it came with a certain set of features and problems it could solve straight out of the box, right? So immediately we could see ticket resolution, things like that. Other solutions have different requirements to get them going. So as we've implemented some chatbot technologies, right, which people consider AI, because in theory, it's talking to a machine and getting answers. In that case, there was a lot more work to do to get effectiveness, and maybe we never, with the particular technologies we've played with so far, we've never gotten quite as far as we'd like, because there was so much work we had to do, which required an army of people we didn't have to prep the data, to create a knowledge base, to structure questions properly, that we never really reached that full potential. So I think, people have to understand that there's a range of AI type solutions, all the way back to the simplest, which is just predictive analytics, right? Where you're using ML models to draw conclusions and take next actions. And in that case, you may be building it from the ground up, and then really preparing the data is the largest job and can take some time. So I think each company has to understand the value of the use case that they're trying to solve, really understand the products they're buying, what needs to go into training the model there. Is it trained out of the box and then is going to adapt and learn more about you and get more specific about you over time? Or are you building that model from scratch because there's no way that problem can be solved because it's truly uniquely about your company? And then there's going to be a different level of effort, and you ought to be convinced that the problem you're solving has that business value that's worth that additional effort.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's, in some ways, two types of AI. There's the embedded, kind of invisible AI that people don't even know is there, that helps the network run better, right? And then there's other AI that the engineer would interact with that does need a bit of tweaking and training and things like that, like with chatbots, that actually changes the way they work. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah. And again, AI, when I'm speaking about AI, I'm not speaking just about AI to serve the network, but AI to solve a broad range of problems, right? So we use AI to make decisions in supply chain. We use, the chatbot example. We have chatbots at the help desk. We have chatbots through the procurement tools. We have chatbots, to help our employees navigate how to find things in the marketing department. So they get applied to all different kinds of problems, and each implementation, Watson is different than ServiceNow's chatbot versus Oracle's chatbot, and what they expect you to do. And in some cases, some companies that provide those technologies out of the cloud, they bring as part of their professional services offerings the people who do all of that data work, because they've done it a bunch of times before with companies and they're not learning on the fly. So there's a whole range of level of effort depending on the nature of the solution.
Yeah, I always caution people too, when they're using AI to interact with customers, make sure it works well, because you can actually have a very negative reaction if it doesn't work well. And I think we've all experienced that, chatbots that don't really understand what you're saying, but they've come a long way, in the last 5 years. And so I think for companies that had a bad experience with it, say 5-6 years ago, it's worth looking again. I'm going to bounce back to you. What was your, you set it up in your own house, which is kind of cool. Can you just kind of double click on the learning process that you went through for your IoT setup?
Yeah, well, at first it was just adding all the sensors, and that's basically where all the magic starts, because at the beginning I just had a bunch of sensors, and yeah, I had a pre-trained model for this whole AI setup, but it wasn't really aware of what I wanted in my house. So it was in this constant learning phase for about, I would say, 6 to 7 months. And at some point I even had to tell it, okay, if there is now a snowstorm in June, for example, because sometimes the weather is just crazy for one day, feel free to ignore that and stuff like this, because if I wouldn't have told it that, snow in summer is something that it has never experienced before. So even for me, that was very weird. So and it was very interesting because at the beginning it almost feels like a very dumb piece of software. And then the more you interact with it, the more you train it, the more you work with it every day, almost like you would work with a new coworker, the more it learns about your, let's call them my needs, like what temperature does he like, or what humidity does he like, and when do I need to open the window and close the window? When do I need to shut the blinds because it's getting too bright and stuff like that? Yeah, now it's just working. It's like magic. I mean, I'm walking through my house, wherever I come into the room, the light gets turned on. When I leave the room, the light gets turned off. And yeah, it basically learned all of that from the behavior that I showed it. So
yeah, that's interesting. They can always, I find sometimes those systems can always get too smart. I've got some smart home stuff in my home.
Yeah.
And it shuts things off and you don't want it to and things like that. But I guess that's all part of the learning process. What does it take to sort of vet an AI solution or vendor? Like, how do you evaluate them?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, you have to really understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then understand what went into the vendor's thinking about the problem they were solving. And the first thing is, are they closely enough aligned that the models that got baked into theirs or that they're going to apply to your problem are actually applicable and going to solve the problem? After that, you then have to, especially in the case of sort of the pre-baked AI, you need to understand the types of data that it was trained on, and whether, again, that data closely enough reflects or is broad enough to at least start creating that value out of the box so that it can learn and continue from there. You have to understand, how does the vendor think about keeping its models up to date? So, you saw during the pandemic, certain AI solutions that were built based on well understood behaviors about how the world worked. So, for retail, there were, years and years of data about people going in and out of stores. All of a sudden it stopped. Well, since the data is the fuel for the model, suddenly that model didn't work anymore in answering some of the questions. That retail is one example. You saw a number of others. Obviously, certain things in the supply chain changed pretty radically. So you have to understand where data discontinuity might break that technology and what's your likelihood for that. So it's really all about, primarily, that many of the algorithms that are the basis for AI, they're well understood statistical analysis. And so first of all, are they applying the right one to the problem? Most likely, if they've had any success in the market, they are. But then it's really about the fuel and the data that feeds that model. How do they deal with the drift that can happen? So those are some of the considerations I think, you need to look at. But it's always first, does the solution match my problem? And do I really deeply understand my problem that I'm trying to solve?
And I think that underscores the importance of pre-built AI systems. Obviously, the more turnkey it is, the easier it is to implement. I think, from an engineer standpoint, where I've seen some hesitation from IT pros is that there's a fear that you need to be a programmer and a data scientist. And frankly, as part of the media, I read a lot for media, that was a big theme many years ago, that everybody in the world would turn into a programmer and everybody would have to become a data scientist. And I think that scared some people, and that's not true. I do think from a skill set perspective, though, engineers do need to think more about becoming a software power user, right? But that's with or without AI. You look at the sophisticated network systems today, not just from yourself, but even from your competitors. Everything's tapped into with APIs. Everything's available via SDKs and things. And so, software is the way forward, and it lets you access a lot of these great features. So, like I said, you don't need to be the data scientist and things like that, but you do need to be comfortable with software. So, and Christian, would you like to, maybe expand here on what Sharon said too?
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a lot more flexibility with this new skill set that you build. Like you said, you're becoming more of a designer. You don't need to be the one coming from a network implementation point of view, where you go to every switch and configure every VLAN on every port, you simply design, okay, this is the VLAN that I want. Here are my devices, go for it. So yeah, you have the weekends back, you have all those night shifts back. So I think it's a great thing. So it's not threatening the jobs, at least from the way that I see it and what I've seen with customers. Is it's not threatening the job, it's giving them more air to breathe, so they can focus on the important business things and not need to waste any time on those little
The reality is,
work.
I'm not going to sit here and say that AI, the infusion of AI in technology isn't going to get rid of some jobs, because it is. But
Sure.
this is just part of technology maturation. Right? We don't have mainframe engineers today. We don't have people working on token ring. Things change over time, and every engineer I talk to, the one piece of advice I give them is, if you're doing things today, forget about the company you work for. Think about your own selfishness, your own needs, and your own job. If you're doing things today that aren't additive to your resume, right, don't do them. Find a way to automate them out of your job. And that's really the power of what you were talking about, Christian, that AI can do. It's like, you don't have to come in on weekends. You don't have to spend hours and hours updating VLANs. And frankly, nobody's going to hire you for your next job because you can do those things, right? So
yeah, exactly.
And when I think about AI in the network, I do think one of the things to look for, though, is a solution that works across the network. It is valid because the experience that a user or a customer gets is based on how applications work across the network, not just within specific silos. And historically, we've treated networks in silos. And that's why even today you'll see AI solutions for Wi-Fi, AI solutions for SD-WAN, AI solutions for the data center, things like that. And while those may work well, they don't really give you a view of the end-to-end network. And so, in data science, there's an axiom, right, that states that good data leads to good insights. Well, siloed data will lead to siloed insights or fragmented insights. And I think you need to have that kind of end-to-end view. So here, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
So Zeus, I as kind of a CIO who has to not only integrate the network, but a broad series of applications and experiences, both for our customers and our employees, across a broad spectrum of functionality, because the pre-built AI solutions, they tend to be fairly narrow in focus, again, because you have to curate a data set that's unique to that problem. And so we haven't yet seen the company, sort of like Oracle and SAP came in and said, well, I'm going to integrate everything from financials through supply chain, and then, work their way back to, order management, the sales front office, right? You've seen these companies come in and provide application suites that cover very broad spectrums of functionality, and it took them years to build it. You haven't really seen that across that sort of cross-functional AI view. So, I joke sometimes that we're going to have the war of the bots, right? Where the bot from vendor A is going to give you a different answer and start fighting with the bot from vendor B. And what I see starting to happen is some of the sort of incident management solutions that people tend to interact with, right? So a person submits a problem, and then a person's on the receiving end of that, it might go through some escalation path, but ultimately you get to a subject matter expert who, will solve your problem. Well, as you've seen in this world of SRE and DevOps, it's rarely one subject matter expert if the problem is complex enough. Well, now some of these solutions are starting to treat the bots as a part of the conversation. And so you might have one or more bots combined with 5 people offering insight into what might be the solution to the problem. But that's still a step away from, some kind of integrated perspective or integrated worldview that I think we'll ultimately need to have in certain areas, right? But it is because of the nature of how these solutions are built, and how important curated data sets are.
Yeah, I think that's the war of the bots already happens in social media. Half of our there's bots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we don't want it to come to our corporate systems though. So anyways, I just have one more question for both of you. And we'll do this, I like to ask this question because I think it's helpful for people watching this. What's one piece of advice that you would give to IT pros and IT leaders as they embark down their IT journeys or their AI journeys? I'll actually go first, and I think it kind of parlays off what Christian said. I think you need to be patient with AI, and you need to understand. And this can actually help you evaluate real AI solutions versus fake AI solutions. AI washing is rampant out there, and every system says they use AI. And a good way to understand if something's real AI or not is to see how it progresses and how it learns over time. As Christian said at first, it may be kind of dumb. You may look at it and go, well, this isn't very helpful at all. But over time, it does get better and it gets smarter and it understands your environment better. In fact, I think Juniper does a nice job of highlighting the efficacy of it and being able and actually demonstrating quantifying how it's changed over time. And so real AI isn't just fancy rules-based systems. And if you go with one of those rules-based systems, you're going to be constantly updating it and constantly changing the rules. And so you have to understand AI is not perfect out of the gate, but it does get better over time and it will help you more and more. And so you need to be patient with it. And so Sharon, what's some advice from you?
The hardest part of adopting technology is fear of change, right? And to your point that you made earlier, is this, which was, yeah, some things are going to change and some types of roles and work will go away. It's part of the natural evolution of technology. So as I say, experiment, right? Try different things, try different flavors, see what works for you, understand the nature of your company and your business, and experiment. And some things are going to be, as we discussed, much more useful straight out of the gate, and some are going to be acquired taste, because the more unique, when you apply AI technology to something that makes you really special and unique, you're not likely to find it out of the box, right? Again, because of that curated data. So, I say kind of play with a lot of different things and try and learn yourself from them, where you're going to have to change and adapt. And like I said, just don't be afraid and get people comfortable slowly. And that may go back to your patience, right? I mean, as is always the case, technology at some level, it creates that's disruptive, creates change that people are uncomfortable with. And I think part of being patient with AI is being patient with the people you're trying to get to use it. So a lot of experimentation.
Experiment and be patient, experiment. Christian, what advice would you give here?
Yeah, I can also echo that. Don't be afraid of it. When I started with this, it almost felt like I'm teaching a child or a new colleague all of the stuff. And at first it felt like I'm doing more work. And I thought like, okay, if I now have to explain everything and basically teach everything, will this really benefit me? But after some time, you will see the benefit and the model learns and everything comes together. And yeah, like I said, you will get more free time to do the stuff that you really want to do and less of the hideous little tasks that, yeah, just waste your time. So be patient, work with it. Yeah, make it your colleague, basically. Explain everything. At first, it's yeah, you need to explain everything, of course, because for the AI, it's brand new what you are just telling it, depending on the type of model that you use. But yeah, it will be so worth it. So don't be scared.
All right, well, that was a great discussion. I'm just gonna, I think, wrap up by saying, I'll echo what was said, don't be afraid of it. AI has already proven in many industries, it makes us better drivers. It makes contact center agents smarter, right? And I think from an engineer's perspective, it's gonna make you a better, smarter engineer. It's gonna let you do a lot more fun things, right? And as a former IT pro, I can tell you, nobody became an IT pro to sit and look through router logs and update VLANs all day long. That just, that's just, if you get enjoyment out of that, maybe you should, seek out some other forms of enjoyment or something. So anyways, AI is coming. There's really, it's going to be infused eventually in everything that we do. It already is on the consumer side. So, Christian, Sharon, thanks for joining me today. I'm Zeus Caravallo from CK Research, and thanks for watching this episode of AI Skeptics.